All right, so now that we've sort of found a way to, break the modes out of sort of their own, their sort of folk-centric kind of thing, and we've seen what we can do with some extended chords, we want to start really investigating, okay, how do all these things come together and coalesce in the overall tonal system used in the Impressionist style? So really trying to add pieces to this Impressionism puzzle. And so we're going to see, okay, let's talk a little bit about some of the things that have made these elements of tonality in Impressionism work so far, and add another crucial piece to the sort of stew that we're building here. And this is something that makes a lot of sense, especially as we think about how it's connected to the modes. So let's sort of dig in. So we're talking about tonality used in Impressionist music, right? And tonality are the systems, the keys, the modes, the scales that are used to sort of get across the overall vibe, mood of what's happening. The thing that really stands out from the modes that made them such an awesome building block for Impressionism is their tonal ambiguity. Because we've seen that while some of them are a little brighter than major, some of them are darker than minor, they're not as locked in, right? We don't have that sort of strength of tonality, which is such a part of major and minor. Even something like Phrygian, for instance, which even something like Phrygian, which is darker than minor, still has a sense of ambiguity because it doesn't have that strength of tonality. Now, when we try to build on that in an Impressionist style, we are going to see that multiple things go hand in hand, right? There's a tonal question that we're asking, right? What keys, scales, modes should we use? But there is also a harmonic set of techniques that are going to be a major contributing factor here too. We're going to deal with those separately. Right now, we really just want to continue looking at the tonal systems that are a big part of this. And what we're going to see is that we are going to be able to bring major and minor back into the picture now that we're learning how to use them a little differently, right? We're not stuck using major and minor in the way that we would have in music that we were looking at in Theory 1, Theory 2, and Theory 3, because we've investigated sort of what does it look like to work with a more ambiguous, a more nebulous tonality. So that's really awesome. But we can also bring in another pitch collection, which is really central to the Impressionist sound and is sort of the, in some ways, the poster child for this ambiguous tonality, which are the pentatonic scales and collections. We're going to see that there are actually three, well, there are many pentatonic scales that we're going to look at. We're going to focus on three, but the big thing to sort of take away from this is that pentatonic scales, like the modes, are very, very old, and these are sort of tonal systems that have sort of developed independently in many different cultures all around the world. They just sort of are a type of like bedrock musical system and continue to be used extremely widely in all music that we tend to hear on a pretty regular basis. They are also very closely associated with many different folk traditions, American folk music, all the way to many Asian folk music styles going way, way, way back historically. And their appeal in all musical styles, but particularly here to Impressionism, is connected to their sense of ambiguity and the flexibility with which they can work. So let's sort of look at some pentatonic ideas here. When we talk about the term pentatonic, this is one of the more easy, I think one of the easier terms that we have to learn, because pentatonic It literally just means it's a 5-note key or 5-note scale. So pentatonic scales are really interesting and unique because there are only 5 notes that make up the key. Now, whenever you we already talked about that. Whenever you break down the number of notes that make up a tonal system, it automatically, the flip side effect is that you can create many, many, many different forms of the pentatonic scale. So that's something that we sort of have to work on defining a little bit, since there are a pretty huge amount of just pure 5-note scales that we can make. We want to sort of define a little bit what we're looking at. So we're going to look at 3 that really stand out here. Something that we're going to see when we talk about how we use these pentatonic scales in Impressionism, which is really critically, is that we can sort of, because there are so few notes, because there's only 5 notes, we're going to find that we can actually be pretty creative with how we use the pentatonic material, because it can either be like a 5-note melodic system, but also it's easy to make chords that contain 5 notes. I mean, we've been using 4-note chords since Theory 2, right? Dominant 7th chords, or any kind of 7th chord, have 1, 2, 3, 4 notes in them. When we add a 9th, that's already got 5 notes in it. So it's no stretch at all to make sort of chords out of 5-note systems. Now, we're thinking much, much less in a triadic mindset here. But we do want to start to think about, okay, since there's only 5 notes in the scale, what are some of the ways that we could use the entire scale as a chord? Which is such a kind of an interesting thing. But it is something that we do need to be conscious of, because it's actually really, really cool. We can do this same thing with modes, like Lydian. We can do it with, here's a chord. I'll go a little higher. This chord, this is a 13 sharp 11, major 13 sharp 11 chord. And it has all the notes of the Lydian scale. So we've got do, re, mi, fi, sol, la, ti. Right? So this idea of using the collection, being all the notes in the scale, as both a melodic source and a harmonic source is not unique to pentatonicism, but because there are only 5 notes, it's particularly tempting and particularly useful. So we'll investigate that a little more, both in the 3 that we're going to look at here and in some pieces that we're going to analyze with pentatonic material. But let's take a look at the 3 most common pentatonic scales. It's really the 2 most common, and then a third one that's also pretty common. But let's take a peek. So pentatonic scales, let's take a look. The first 2 have very exciting names. So we've got the major pentatonic, the minor pentatonic, and then finally a little bit of color here, the hirajoshi scale, which is a more Japanese-derived scale. The first 2, major and minor pentatonic, are the 2 that are used worldwide. Very, very, very common in all, well, not all, but a huge percentage of musics from around the world. So let's dig in here. Major pentatonic. We're going to look at all of these as if they were based around the note G. So G pentatonic, G major pentatonic, sounds like this. That should be a sound that you're extremely familiar with. We have so many melodies that are in this key. Many American folk songs. Right? You can just imagine any number of things using that. So let's take a peek at what's going on in here. The solfege syllables are do, re, mi, sol, la, sol, mi, re, do. So if we compare major pentatonic to the major scale, what's missing? Well, we've got do, re, mi. We don't have fa, right? So there's no C. Do, re, mi, sol, la. And we don't have T, right? So the two notes that are missing are the 4th degree and the 7th degree, which are that's really important because those are the two notes that are a half step away from other notes, right? So we've got do, re, mi, but in a major scale, we'd have a half step mi to fa, right? And we'd also have ti, do. So we've gotten rid of the two half steps, and also C and F sharp create that tritone interval, which is so important for centralizing and strengthening the tonality of G major. So we've sort of eliminated some very, very critical notes from G major, which is why pentatonic can sound so distinct and so much more ambiguous. So major pentatonic, do, re, mi, sol, la, do, la, sol, mi, re, do. You should be able to imagine million songs that you've heard in major pentatonic. Really important. Now, let's look at minor pentatonic. So here we are, G minor pentatonic, and let's look at what's different. So there's two notes that are the same. Do, sol, but everything else has changed. So we've got this sound. Do, me, fa, sol, te, sol, fa, me, do. So again, if we were to compare this to, say, the natural minor scale, no re, because re to me is a half step, do, me, fa, sol, and no le, because le, sol, le is a half step, and again, re, le, tritone. So we're left with no half steps, no tritone. Do, me, fa, sol, te, sol, fa, me, do, te, do. I mean, come on. Right? I mean, you know that sound. Anytime you've got like one of these. Right? Like that's minor pentatonic. It's great. Now, let's look at something though, because we've looked at G major pentatonic and G minor pentatonic. But what if we wanted to sort of spice things up a little bit and say, okay, I'm done with minor. What if I wanted to make, I don't know, let's say B flat major pentatonic, right? B flat major pentatonic. So we'd start on B flat, and then we'd have do, re, mi, sol, la, B flat, C, D, F, G. Oh, well, what's interesting about that? So B flat major pentatonic. Let's take a look. B flat, C, D, F, G. Uh-oh. Can you see what's happening? So we had G minor pentatonic, which is G, B flat, C, D, F. And here's B flat major pentatonic. B flat, C, D, F, G. So we've got the same sort of relative major, relative minor thing going on. We can illustrate it again up here. This is G major. G, A, B, D, E, D, B, A, G. Well, if I wanted to make E minor pentatonic, which is the relative minor of G, I'd have E, G, A, B, D, da, da, da. Right? So we've sort of got this cool situation where the same relative major and minor pairs still match up. And it just shows that the major and minor pentatonic scales retain that sense of ambiguity that we loved about the modes, and they also retain that sense of tonal weakness that we loved about the modes, because if I want to be in G major pentatonic, it's really easy to go minor. Right? So there's sort of a question about is there really a major and minor pentatonic? Are they two different scales, or are they really one scale with just a major minor? But I think we should think of them as two separate scales, but I just want to sort of show you that's one of these great things. Now, let's change it up, though, and take a peek here at the hirajoshi scale, which is a Japanese-derived version of the pentatonic scale, which is going to feel very, very, very distinct. We're back in G, and we've got this sound. What stands out to you about this compared to the major and minor pentatonic? Well, it's chock full of half steps. So we've got do, re, mi, right? That's a half step, re, mi. And we've got sol, la. Right? That's so gorgeous. Right? Oh shoot, I played F. That's not in the scale. My bad. But you can hear the lovely, lovely sound of the hirajoshi, which is very distinct from major and minor. So it's a really, really wonderful sound to use, especially if you want that openness of a pentatonic world, but don't want the familiarity of major and minor. So hopefully you can see how these ideas would be extremely useful in the Impressionist style. Let's talk a little bit about some harmonization techniques that also would contribute to this sound.